Josh here. And finally, a group of cards appears to be complete. What group of cards am I talking about? Consecrate, Desecrate, that little grouping of cards of which there are 4. Now, the first card that we saw in this group was the site Consecrated Ground, which is an Earth site that has some of the best text that we've seen so far in Gothic. Evil has no power here. Very cool, very thematic, awesome card. Then the next that we saw, if I recall correctly, was Desecrate. So Desecrate is an air spell, air magic, so a magic spell, 2 mana, 2 air threshold. An evil ally strikes its site, then may transform it into a desecrated ground from your collection. Now, at the time, we didn't know what desecrated ground did, but we know that this card now exists, that you can change sites and pull one from your collection. Now, what made this card interesting, and this isn't exceptional, by the way, what made this card interesting was you could do this to your opponent's site. So it would transform and become a desecrated ground. Now, your opponent is still going to own and control that site. Transformation of an object in the game does not result in a change in ownership unless the rules get changed tomorrow. So that transformation, it's just like polymorph, right? You give your opponent a frog token by changing their Hydra into a frog because, yes, that's much better for you. So in this case, if your opponent is not playing air, you have a way to deny them potentially threshold. You have a way to deal with a site that's very problematic for you, such as maybe a consecrated ground that you really don't want to be around, so that you can actually use your evil minions to attack the site because now it's desecrated. So what did desecrated ground? What is that? We didn't get that. That came next. Desecrated ground is an air site, 1 air threshold. Evil units here have +1 power. So +1 power. Very nice. So being able to change one of your opponent's sites to something that you have +1 power at sounds really good. And then finally, we got the last card of this group. And I think it's the most interesting of the 4 in a way. With Desecrate, it seemed obvious you would want to do that to your opponent's sites because you strike the site. So, you're going to do a strike, be life loss. Then you can make it into this air site where your minions have +1 power. That all sounds really, really good. Then we got that last card, Consecrate, which is almost the exact, well, it is the exact opposite of Desecrate. 2 mana, 2 earth threshold. An ally wards its site, then may transform it into a consecrated ground from your collection. Okay, well, that's something I do to my own site, right? Not necessarily. Let's say your opponent's playing a lot of evil. Yeah, you're going to give them a ward on the site, but if you go over there and your ally, you play Consecrate, then yeah, you give the site a ward, and then it transforms into the consecrated ground from your collection. But if your opponent's on a lot of evil, now all of a sudden he has a site that, well, he or she may not be able to deal with at all because they have all these evil minions and they can't defend it properly. So you have, even though you have given them a site that is warded initially, so you're going to have to break through that ward, you now have a site that they may have trouble actually defending. So that's why I think Consecrate is kind of the most interesting of these 4 cards because thematically, it's a card that you would want to use on your own sites to give it a ward. And then, maybe you played something like, say, a lookout, and it's in a bad position on your front line, right? So, let's say your starting site was site 3. On site 8, for whatever reason, you had to play a lookout. So now it's not really doing you any good, and it's an air. I mean, it's an air site. But let's say you're like, I'm not worried about getting this air. Or maybe it was a quagmire. There we go. That's a better example. Let's use quagmire. You played a quagmire. There it is. And now you're like, okay, well, its effect is done. So let's go ahead and use Consecrate to turn it into a consecrated ground to protect me against evil. And you get the ward. So it feels very defensive, and yet it can be used offensively. So I think that's why it's the most interesting card. And so this group of cards leads me to a question. Many of us had thought that maybe we'll start seeing a lot more site destruction with Gothic. We'll start seeing site destruction. But could it also be messing with your opponent's threshold by replacing their sites with consecrated ground, desecrated ground? Is that something that you can do? Now, I think this strategy is obviously far more risky than direct site destruction like you can get with Hamlets Ablaze and Castles Ablaze. But it costs less overall, although it costs a card in your collection. That's kind of a biggie. But in the sense of, Consecrate, you can actually use it defensively as well. The Desecrate and Desecrated Ground, that's definitely all offense. I think it would be very rare for you to desperately need to, maybe you desperately need air threshold. You need that third for, some card. You need that third air threshold, and you're like, I guess I'm going to sack this site. I'm going to attack, it's going to, because the minion does strike it. You're going to take a life loss. But, if it's a 1-power minion, a 1-power evil ally, because it has to be an evil ally. That's the big thing with Desecrate. And that's kind of the weird thing I thought with Consecrate. It didn't specify a non-evil ally wards the site. So it would seem that an evil ally can consecrate a site. Yeah, that seems weird and wrong, but probably for the, saving text, they didn't want to put non-evil in that text. So I don't know, just, is that a way that they're also looking at, and is it worth it? I don't know, your opponent may be on Earth, your opponent may be on air, so changing out their sites may not be as helpful. Although, if they have a lot of defensive sites, it could be. If they're using defensive sites, even changing it to, even if they're on air, changing something, a Cloud City. You change their Cloud City to a desecrated ground. There we go. Seems good. So, is that, you can eliminate those troublesome sites. Is that enough? And the idea of messing with their thresholds is just kind of a bonus. I don't know. It's a very interesting concept to me. It's given me a lot of thought. And when I finally saw Consecrate, I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. Because again, it feels like it should be more defensive. It's something you're going to do. You're going to ward your own site because that makes sense. But I feel like offensively it could be really useful, especially if your opponent isn't on Earth. If your opponent is on air or fire and they don't have any Earth, right? And all of a sudden you go up there, you consecrate one of their sites, and all of a sudden it's a consecrated ground that has Earth threshold, and evil has no power here. and we all know fire and air have got plenty of evil in them. It's almost, it's offensive, right? That's an offensive thing to do. Even though, yeah, they're going to get their mana, but potentially you've taken away some type of threshold they need. I don't know. It's really interesting. And it's so odd that an evil ally can consecrate. That's so strange to me. And I don't know why they just didn't put non-evil. A non-evil ally wards its sight. That's what I would have done. But I don't know. It is what it is. But so there's that group. We finally got the last card. What do you think? Is this going to have a future, or are these just cards that are going to go into the bulk? I don't know. I'm a little torn. I can see their use, but obviously we've got 300 more cards to go. So who knows? That's it for today. As always, keep on contesting the realm!